Hello, everybody. The playoffs are upon us. This is the Wildcard edition of Down by Contact Sunday Postgame. I'm your host, Jeff Rich, coming to you from Phoenix, Arizona. I'm joined, as always, by my colleague in Northern California, Chris Green. Chris and I just got done watching the Dallas Cowboys defeat the Detroit Lions in what I'm sure will be described as controversial fashion. But hey, first of all, Chris, how you doing? How you enjoying these playoffs so far?
It's been some great games so far. I have to say it's been very entertaining for the most part.
It is, and we got our losing team into the playoffs from the NFC South. They hosted a
Hmm.
game, and in the fashion of playoff teams or division champions with losing records, they were victorious in the game that kicked off the playoffs Saturday afternoon. Carolina's 27, Arizona 16. This game was a little one-sided, even if the score wasn't didn't indicate such going into the half of yesterday's game, with the Cardinals actually leading the Carolina Panthers by a score of 14-13. Um, this was probably the only game from the weekend that was thoroughly affected by the elements. Thoughts on the early goings on of Arizona Carolina, and thoughts on the whole of this game.
Yeah, I mean, considering the fact that for the entire game, Arizona only put up 97 yards of offense and they still ended up with 16 points, that's a very, very deceiving. I mean, in all honesty, if Carolina hadn't made a few errors and then gave up the safety late, they wouldn't have scored in this game. The offense wasn't real effective. It was just that the two times they got the touchdowns, they were off of turnovers, and they had such great field position, they almost had to score at that point. I don't know that it was necessarily Carolina's defense that was so great in that game, or if it was just that the ineffectiveness of Arizona's offense, which is something we had talked about going into the playoffs, that I was very concerned for them with Ryan Lindley at quarterback if they could even put any points on the board. It was going to come down to the defense, and the defense did what it could, but without any offense to really back them up, it just came down to the Carolina just trying to score at that point.
Regardless of their record throughout the season, there were quote unquote experts that claimed the Arizona Cardinals to be fraudulent, whether they were 7-1, 11-3, where they finished at 11-5 in the regular season. We know that they took hit after hit. They lost Darrell Washington for the season to suspension. They lost Darnell Dockett early. Really didn't have Carson Palmer for any extended periods of time. Never really had anything going with the running game. Kerwin Williams stepped up a little bit late, later in the season, but 10 carries for 23 yards. That's not going to cut it in the postseason or really any game when you're the featured back in an offense. And then you had Ryan Lindley, 16 of 28 for 82 yards. Uh, just not enough. Now, did the Cardinals did the injuries just finally catch up with the Cardinals, or did they just finally play a game that mattered and found themselves to be exposed?
In all honesty, I think it was just a matter of the injuries catching up to them. They were a very good team when everybody was healthy, but I mean, when you're down to your third string quarterback, unless you're Ohio State, you really don't have much chance of winning playoff games.
That's probably true. That's probably true. On the other side, Jonathan Stewart has an excellent day, 123 yards on the ground. Other than the Foswit Whitaker 39-yard catch and run for the touchdown, not a lot going on in Carolina's passing game. Now Carolina's had their share of injuries as well, with Cam Newton, but I think the story of this game, not so much Arizona's inept offense as much as it was Carolina stepping up on defense. I thought that Charles Johnson, earned his rather large paycheck yesterday, and to that effect, Thomas Davis was just out of this world, all over the place. And of course Luke Kuechly making big plays in both the running and passing defensive game for Carolina. Any comments on Ron Rivera's defense there in Carolina?
Absolutely. I was very impressed with the way they played yesterday. And it's kind of been a theme that's been going on. I mean, you think about it, Carolina went into their last four games with a 3-8 record. They won out to get to the playoffs at 7-8-1. So they're on a 5-game winning streak now after this playoff win. That just shows you that the defense really came together at the time it needed to, because the offense has been just done enough to get by, but the defense has really carried them down the stretch. I mean, yes, the running game has definitely been an improvement, but I wouldn't say Cam Newton played a great game yesterday. He did just a few things to get by, but he hasn't been the story for them. It's definitely been the run game and the defense has carried them through this point.
And getting it done without D'Angelo Williams. I mean, I think I saw that in the 37 games that they've been, that they've, in the last 37 games they've played 10 at the same time. Jonathan Stewart and D'Angelo Williams. So, they don't really have their thunder and lightning attack like they should. So, Carolina strikes me as a team. If they pull out a couple of those wins and they're instead of 3-8-1, if they're 5-7 through 12 games and they're on this 5-game winning streak, I think that we'd probably take this team a little more seriously.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I heard yesterday they were talking about Jonathan Stewart. Actually, in the last 4 games, he's rushed for as many yards as he had in the previous 2 years combined. I mean, think about that. He's ran for over close to 500 yards in the 4 games, and in the past 2 years he didn't reach that. So that's pretty astonishing. So it's kind of like somebody's looking down on them and smiling right now, because I mean, Cam Newton had the car accident, broke his back, and yet he comes back 2 weeks later. It's just pretty amazing to think about where they were and where they are now going into the second round against the Seahawks.
Yeah, and you know what? 24 for 123. It's about 5 yards a carry. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, that's putting you. Obviously it doesn't work out like this all the time, but you run for 5 on first down, 5 on second down, or a total of 9 yards on the first 2 downs. You're looking at 3rd and 1, which opens up your offense for so many other things. And Carolina, they didn't really get a lot to like Kelvin Benjamin and their big, their bigger receiving targets. Greg Olsen was a factor, obviously, but. Carolina got it done with the running game. They got it done with Newton picking his battles. I guess would be the right way to put it. He wasn't a check and run guy, but he took off when he had to and got the yards that he needed to keep the ball and keep the chains moving. So I was pretty impressed with the way that he's playing with limited mobility and taking limited risks.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, he made the plays he had to when they needed him most. So whether it was a scramble to get that first down or that pass in a key situation, it was interesting. You brought up Kelvin Benjamin. He's supposed to be this great receiver, but he drops an awful lot of passes, and that's one thing they're going to have to keep an eye on, because they got lucky a couple of times yesterday. There was the punt return guy, I can't think of his name off the top of my head. He almost fumbled a couple of those returns. He did fumble one.
Yeah, Burson definitely did.
Exactly. So that was kind of shaky. They were just having issues hanging on to the ball in general. I don't know if that was just a matter of from the rain and the weather, but that's one thing they're going to have to watch. I mean, Newton threw the 1 interception, but he could have easily had 2 more. So while they got by, they're going to have to clean up some of those things against the Seahawks, because they're not going to let those opportunities go to waste.
Yeah, that's going to be a tough challenge for Carolina to go into the belly of the beast in Seattle there and do what very few teams have done, and nobody's done it in the playoffs of recent. So let's move on. Pittsburgh had a home game by virtue of winning their division. Team that they're very, very familiar with in the Baltimore Ravens, and you send regular season Joe Flacco golfing for the winter, and all of a sudden you bring in this guy that's thrown 13 touchdowns, no interceptions in the postseason. Regardless of how that you and I might feel about the Baltimore Ravens, you have to take a look at an organization that's only been around since 1996. Wink, wink. And the fact that they have the all-time NFL record for road playoff victories with 10 is just incredible when you consider how long the NFL has been around. Now, granted, the playoff pool has expanded, the number of games has obviously expanded, but that's still a pretty impressive feat for John Harbaugh and the Baltimore Ravens there.
Absolutely. I mean, like I said last week, he goes from being Joe Flacco to Joe Montana as soon as the playoffs start now. I know he started out his first couple of years with like one touchdown and five interceptions, but ever since that third season, he has really, he's just morphed into a completely different quarterback in the postseason. I mean, Flacco is a good quarterback during the regular season, but he becomes a great quarterback as soon as that calendar turns to January.
All right, and the Baltimore Ravens do win this game. Let me throw the score out there: Baltimore 30, Pittsburgh 17. Close game at the half. It's 10-9 at the half. Baltimore pulls away in the third quarter, and they were just in Ben Roethlisberger's face the entire game, and that mobility that we're accustomed to seeing from Ben Roethlisberger, that finding a way to win, it just didn't happen on Saturday night. And possibly concussed. We see Bruce Gronkowski for a little bit. Antonio Brown still gets his, but Steve Smith Sr., the former Carolina Panther, also gets his for Joe Flacco and the Ravens, and they don't run the ball well. Forsett leads the way with 16 carries for 36 yards. So, tell me what happened to the Pittsburgh Steelers that. Though they were probably down by 11 at the most of this game, where did things fall apart for Pittsburgh?
They're obviously they were missing their MVP, Le'Veon Bell. That was a huge loss for them because when you're starting Ben Tate, who has already been cut by the Browns and the Vikings this season already, you know you're going to be in trouble. And then Josh Harris only racked up 25 yards as well. Now, the Ravens are already a very good defense, and they got Nada back from his suspension. So running against them with him in general is going to be tough, but when you're missing your number one running back, that's just a killer right there, and they're just going to tee off on Roethlisberger exactly what they did. I know they had more sacks against Roethlisberger in this game than I believe they had said he'd had in the last 7 games combined or something like that. So they hammered him, knocked him out at one point, and I mean he can only do so much. He's one man though. He's a pretty damn good quarterback, but he can't do it all on his own. And without any support from the running game, they just teed off on him.
Yeah, and how misleading is the 334 yards passing? I mean, can we just? I've already abandoned it with the college football game, looking at the stat sheet. But can we abandon passing yards as any kind of barometer of how a quarterback plays, unless it's unless it's on the probably in the red or on the negative side? Because 300 yards passing means very little to me based on some of the performances I've seen this season.
Well, absolutely, because you got to remember a lot of those yards end up coming in garbage time when the other team's up big and they're running their 2-minute offense trying to get down the field and put up points, which is exactly what Pittsburgh was doing in the fourth quarter. And that's where he racked up a lot of those yards at the end, but he also racked up at least one, if not both of those interceptions in the fourth quarter as well.
And you mentioned Le'Veon Bell. Fair to say that this game has a much different outlook, if not a different result. If maybe Pittsburgh gets the week off and you get Le'Veon Bell back on the field in the divisional round of the playoffs.
Absolutely. He's their biggest weapon. I mean, between him and Antonio Brown, they're really your two big weapons on offense. I mean, Heath Miller's nice, and Wheaton and Bryant do good things, or Martavis Bryant do really good things, but without Le'Veon Bell, I mean, you're losing half of your offense, in all honesty.
Yeah, all right. Let's go from Saturday into Sunday. Game between two very inconsistent teams throughout the 2014 season. You had the Colts hosting the Wildcard Cincinnati Bengals. Final score of this one: Indianapolis 26, Cincinnati 10. Looked much closer game at halftime than it was in the end, and it just looked like Andrew Luck was waiting to play, waiting for his opportunity, waiting to be able to take his shots. Cincinnati impaired a little bit by not having the services of AJ Green and to a lesser extent Jermaine Grisham on the field. But good Andy, bad Andy. What's our outlook on the Cincinnati Bengals, the coaching job of Marvin Lewis, and how does the future look? We're going on 30 years without a playoff win for this Cincinnati organization.
Well, exactly. I mean, for most teams, I would say I think it's time for Marvin Lewis to move on because he's 0-5 in the playoffs. While they get there, they don't win any. They automatically put up a loss in that first round. And Dalton played I mean, 18 to 35 for 155 yards. That's pretty pedestrian. I don't care if they didn't have A.J. Green. He still had Mohamed Sanu, who is a very good receiver. I mean, they didn't get much support. Jeremy Hill was a leading rusher with 47 yards, but even Bernard was their leading receiver today out of the backfield. So, I mean, that tells you everything you need to know right there. Most of those routes are going to be check downs. So, and this is a Colts team that we've talked about this year who pretty much outscores everybody, and to only give up 10 points today, that tells you something, that Cincinnati's offense didn't do anything. And I don't know, I guess at this point I would say Marvin Lewis has got to go, but based on their history and the fact that Mike Brown runs that team and is notoriously tight with the pocketbook, I imagine he'll be back next year.
As do I, and I could argue that T.Y. Hilton dropped some balls that could have made this game a little more laughable for in favor of Indianapolis. So, the Colts next week they go to Denver. Thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I believe that'll be a shootout for sure. I mean, Peyton Manning going up against his old teammates, and though he's not the Peyton Manning of old, I still look for a plus minus of 70 points together.
Yeah, that could be pretty close. The divisional round matchup I didn't bring up, and I thought that coming out of this wild card weekend, I had a Broncos fan ask me the other day who has the best chance of going into New England and knocking them off in the divisional round. I would have said the Baltimore Ravens. What are your thoughts on the upcoming matchup between Baltimore and New England at Foxborough?
Well, those have definitely been some classic games over the last few years between Baltimore and New England, so it should be a very interesting game. It just depends on if Joe Flacco keeps playing like Joe Montana or if Joe Flacco comes back to earth. And then, I mean, New England's got a pretty revamped defense there, so they should play pretty well on that end. And it just Tom Brady's been pretty good since his early season struggles, so that could be another shootout game. It's just going to be, I mean, Baltimore's defense has been pretty solid, but I could still see another shootout going on there. And it's also going to depend on the weather conditions. I haven't seen what the forecast is, so if it's snowing and really cold, that could throw a wrench into everything.
Well, you know what, Chris? You and I tend to talk about what happens on the field. I want to ask you about something off the field. John Harbaugh came out after the game and said that Joe Flacco is the best quarterback in the NFL. I know you got to support your guy. That goes without saying. But does this give the New England Patriots any fuel? Does it fuel the flame with them at all? Because you have to think that in that locker room, they believe that Tom Brady is the best quarterback in the NFL. Do Harbaugh's comments mean anything? Do they provide bulletin board material, or is it just something that you walk on by?
Yeah, I mean, it may be. I'm sure it's not something that Belichick's going to let by. I'm sure that'll definitely be bulletin board material. But the last time those two teams played, too, I mean, Baltimore beat them. So right now they have bragging rights. So it's up to New England to come up through in this game.
All right. So we had 3 games between Saturday and Sunday. In the early action on Sunday, games decided by double digits. The one game that was closer, kind of went down to the wire, took place in Arlington between the Detroit Lions and the Dallas Cowboys. Cowboys get the late score to go up 24-20, and that ends up being the final. Detroit still can look back to 1991 as their most recent playoff victory, which is kind of funny because the Cleveland Browns, who ceased to exist for 3 years and arguably have ceased to exist since 1995. Have a more recent playoff victory than both the Cincinnati Bengals and the Detroit Lions. Story of this game is probably gonna be Detroit leads 20-17. Stafford throws to Pettigrew, covered by the rookie linebacker Anthony Hitchens. Flag is thrown, pass interference is called, and then waved off. I guess we could start there and kind of talk about the rest of the game as it went.
Yeah, I mean, you say 2017 too, but in all honesty, it was 20-7 at one point. Dallas was really in a big hole, and any year before this, they would have been done. The fact that they came back in this game, I think it says a lot. I think it says they've done some growing up and some maturing because, they always make the jokes about how Romo flames out in spectacular fashion in these games, and today he did not. He actually pulled down. I mean, yes, that play was controversial, but at the end of the day, he made the plays he needed to at the end, where he's usually the butt of the jokes. So he wins this one, and definitely leads to optimism. I mean, this is a much closer game than I expected it to be in general. I really thought the way Dallas had been playing that they'd come in and just blow Detroit out, and it was completely the opposite way for the first three quarters. So that I'm just impressed that they came back and pulled it off. And even though there was some very questionable stuff going on at the end with the Dallas pass rush fumbling after they get Stafford to fumble. They fumble it right back to Detroit. That could have easily cost them the game. They end up getting that last fumble on to get retribution and pull out the game.
And you know what? There were plenty of opportunities that fell into Dallas's lap that they just squandered. I mean, first possession of the second half, Detroit gets the kickoff. They get pinned down deep in their own territory. Dallas forces the interception, and then then Romo gets sacked on third down. They miss the long field goal attempt. They end up picking up another field goal attempt. As you mentioned, the turnover that they by what was it, DeMarco Leonard. That and I think it was Riley Reef that stripped him, and Detroit ends up with the ball back and a refresh on the downs, and that was right at the 2-minute warning, so that was game over right there. And Dallas does force and Dallas had to come up with another play after that. So one of the things that I want to talk about in the imbalance in officiating, or perhaps the balance in officiating, was there was a pass interference call right before Dallas's first touchdown, the long slant to Terrence Williams, where Williams got called for pass interference on a third down play, which was 3rd and 2, and he basically got thrown into a pick, and they called him for offensive pass interference. And on the very next play, which is 3rd and 12, he ends up catching the long slant, going for 6. So some retribution to be had there. I thought arguably on the DeMarco Murray touchdown, they got called back, and then Terrence Williams caught another touchdown. Jason Witten was called for a pretty questionable holding call, where he kind of got where he just got turned into a hooking the defender. So I thought there were some calls that went against Dallas that probably shouldn't have. So I know in Detroit they're going to blame the Zebras for this one, but this game was called fairly inconsistently both ways. So I think that in the end, it all came out in the wash, and Dallas made the plays. Dallas made the plays that they needed to, and Detroit just, the team that showed up in the first half didn't show up in the second half.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's kind of frightening that we're having questionable officiating during the playoffs, considering these are supposed to be the best of the best only that are doing these games. I mean, I know they have the different tiers where the top line ones get the Super Bowl, and then they kind of bring them down, but still, you would expect much cleaner officiating when you get to the playoffs, as opposed to a lot of the incidents we saw during the season and blown calls. So I don't know if this is their way of trying to even it out or what, but NFL's really got to take a look at this, because the officiating this season overall has just really seemed to be very, very inconsistent. And it's almost going to be like the how baseball used to be with the strike zone, where you have every umpire has their own freaking strike zone. I mean, it's getting a little ridiculous.
And you know what? You could blame that a little bit on the disbanded crews. How these head officials aren't working with their regular season crew, and that could affect chemistry with the officiating crews. I've never been an official myself, so I really can't speak to it too much. But Dallas 8-0 on the road this regular season. They go to Lambeau, tough place to play it. Obviously, you got Aaron Rodgers waiting for you there, but your thoughts on them going into Green Bay and perhaps advancing to the NFC Championship?
Well, going to Green Bay in January is tough for any team, but especially when you're a warm weather team going up to the frozen tundra and sub-zero temperatures that I'm sure will be waiting for them. It could be an interesting game. I mean, it could be a very low-scoring game depending on the weather, or it could be another shootout between two very high-powered offenses. So either way, I think it'll be a good game, but at the end, I still think Green Bay is going to pull that one out.
All right, that's going to do it for the Wildcard edition of Down by Contact Sunday post game. Chris, do you have anything to plug this week?
Yeah, I actually will be on my More Than a Fan Tavern podcast Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern. My first Wednesday of the month. I'll be on with my co-hosts John Barkin and Chris Kidd. So we'll be talking some Cleveland sports topics, I'm sure.
All right, and if you want to follow the More Than a Fan Tavern on Twitter, that's at MTAF Tavern. And if you want to follow Chris and get his insights on these NFL games, I think you do a great job paying attention, finding little nuances to the game. Go ahead and follow Chris on Twitter at CGRN731. As for me, I'm going to start doing a little more writing as we've flipped the calendar to the new year. So look for my content on morethanafan.net. If you want to follow me on Twitter, I'm at byjeffrich, and catch the podcast all over mtaf.tv. And we should be recording new Down by Contact podcasts throughout the week, so pay attention to that. But that's all I've got for you this week. Thanks for tuning in, and have a great week, everyone.